seeing you off into the future. So today, we're going to revisit the old classic 6 versus 8 core battle with one of the most demanding scenarios possible, Battlefield 6 Conquest Multiplayer. And the results may surprise you. But before we get to that, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by ASUS Store and their new Locker Store 6 Gen 3 AS6806T. Packing a quad-core AMD Ryzen CPU with 16GB of DDR5 4800 ECC memory. It offers easy backups to numerous devices and cloud services. Included is dual 10GB Ethernet, which can be combined in SMB multi-channel for up to twice the bandwidth. And in addition to that, there's also 5GB Ethernet along with 2 USB 4 ports. As for the software, you're not locked down, as ASUS Tor NAS devices do not restrict installing third-party operating systems, and the latest version of ASUS Tor Data Manager packs all the features you could possibly need, including iSCSI. We've populated ours with Seagate's Ironwolf 20TB drives, and with the health management software we can ensure the drives are running optimally. There's also 4 M.2 slots supporting PCIe 4.0 for ultra-fast storage. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so I've been tackling the misconception that many gamers seem to have about CPUs and core count for years now. And despite my best efforts, I'm still seeing many of the same comments surrounding the release of Battlefield 6, or at least, the open beta. For example, Battlefield 6 can heavily utilize 16-core processors, meaning it allows for parallel processing, splitting up the workload into smaller independent tasks or subtasks, so that multiple cores can work simultaneously. What this means is, if you have a 16-core processor, the game will do a good job of spreading the load across all 16 cores. But what this doesn't mean is that the game requires 16 cores, or that a 16-core processor will necessarily be faster than a 6-core processor, for example. It's merely good news for higher core count CPUs, as it means you'll be getting better performance out of these individual CPUs than you would have if the game, say, utilised 6 or 8 cores. Now, if for example the game 100% utilised a 16-core Ryzen 9 5950X, as in all cores maxed out, and this resulted in an average frame rate of just over 100 FPS, then it stands to reason that 8-core and in particular 6-core Ryzen processors of the same generation would really struggle, likely limiting performance to well below 100 FPS, and possibly even suffering from poor frame time performance plagued by stuff like stuttering. But if the game was to spread the load across all 16 of the 5950X's cores, but only saw an overall CPU utilization of, say, 50%, then it means an 8-core processor should still work well, and possibly even a 6-core model of the same generation. And this is more what we're seeing from Battlefield 6. So then, Battlefield 6 can utilize 16 cores, but it certainly doesn't require 16 cores. If you were to use an older 12 or 16 core processor, the game would run much better than if the core utilization was limited to just 6 or 8 cores. Therefore, as is always the case, at least within reason, a certain number of cores isn't required. It's more about the overall CPU performance than it is individual core count. There are certainly 6-core CPUs that will deliver better performance than even the 5950X in Battlefield 6, such as the Ryzen 5 7600X, and this is because the individual cores of the Zen 4 processor are much faster than the Zen 3 cores of the 5950X. Now, when talking about CPUs of the same generation, adding more cores can certainly be of benefit, especially when there's no latency penalty associated with adding those extra cores. For example, in a CPU-demanding game like Battlefield 6, I would always expect the 5800X to be faster than the 5600X, as both CPUs use a single CCD, but I wouldn't necessarily expect the 5900X to be faster than the 5600X, and this is due to the latency penalty incurred when communicating between CCDs. So the architectural design also plays a role in this core count discussion, but that's an added layer of complexity that we won't delve into for this content. The point is, the 5800X is likely to be faster than the 5600X, given there's 33% more cores, but I wouldn't expect it to be 33% faster, as the cores won't be fully utilised, and there will still be some reliance on the primary thread that will cause a processing bottleneck. But rather than theorise about this, we might as well just take a look. So for testing, the same method as previous Battlefield 6 videos, that means I'll be benchmarking the processors simultaneously, so the benchmark passes were recorded in the same match at the same time, with both systems doing very much the same thing. Once again, for the graphics card, both systems are of course fitted with a GeForce RTX 5090, and because this is strictly a CPU benchmark, testing takes place at 1080p, but I've also included some 1440p data. But if you're a gamer and you don't understand why we're not going as high as 4K for a CPU test, well, we do have a lot of videos explaining just that, so I guess go watch those. And remember when doing so, GPU limited, especially heavily GPU limited, CPU testing is super duper dumb. Super duper TI dumb. And of course this isn't a system benchmark, again it is a CPU benchmark. And therefore this has nothing to do with what resolution you think gamers game at and how that should apply to this CPU testing. Okay, annoying disclaimer once again out of the way, I think we should probably get on with it, so let's go do it. We'll start with the current generation Zen 5 processors. Here we have the 6-core Ryzen 5 9600X alongside the 8-core 9700X, both locked at 5.4 GHz, both using DDR5 6000 CL30 memory, and of course the GeForce RTX 5090. This test at 1080p using the low preset ran for just over 2 minutes, and much of that time was spent in the action. We saw an average utilization of 80 to 85% for the 9600X, and then 60 to 65% for the 9700X. After just over 2 minutes of gameplay, the 9600X averaged 161 FPS, and the 9700X 168 FPS, making the 8-core processor just 4% faster. The 1% lows were even closer. Here the 8-core part was just 2.5% faster, and both displayed excellent frame time performance. So it seems to be the case that those playing Battlefield 6 won't be able to tell the difference between these two processors, despite the 9700X packing 33% more cores. Now, to avoid a small portion of gamers having an aneurysm or some other kind of serious medical emergency, I've included some 1440p results, because like, who games at 1080p with an RTX 5090? That is totally unrealistic, or, whatever. So anyway, I'm having too much fun with this, sorry guys. 1440p with the low preset, let's get serious here. Now, because these results are still heavily CPU bound, frame rates end up being much the same, and so does the margin between these two processors, as the 9700X was just 4% faster on average. That being the case, let's move on to check out the ultra quality preset, again starting with the 1080p resolution data. Now this might surprise some of you, but as is often the case, the higher quality settings don't just stress the GPU, but also the CPU. And despite the frame rates dropping quite considerably, suggesting that we're more likely to run into a GPU bottleneck, the heavier CPU load actually sees a larger separation between the 6 and 8 core processors. By the end of this test, the 9700X is seen to be 9% faster than the 9600X, with a 10% increase to the 1% lows. Not exactly